Now, the thing about copyright is that in order to be granted these rights, that work actually has to be original. And you also have to have a certain level of human skill or creative judgment in molding that work. Where it becomes really interesting is if you start really fine-tuning your prompting process. Now we're in a realm that perhaps we can have some copyright protections on that output.
Welcome to Authentic AI for Entrepreneurs, the podcast that shows you how to leverage the power of AI technology without wasting your time or selling your soul. Let's embrace making AI work for you. Hey, my friend, and welcome to another episode. I cannot tell you how excited I am to share today's conversation with you because we are chatting with the amazing Jaime, who is a lawyer. We talk about the implications of AI technology from a legal standpoint. This conversation was just so interesting, especially if you are using AI technology to create content for you, to create some sort of copy for you or resources for you in your business, and you're worried about, will this be legal? Will this be protected under copyright laws? What should I do to protect myself when it comes to using AI technology and all the things? Jaime has thoughts for us. She has answers for us. This conversation was just so interesting. I know you're going to love it too. So if you do, don't forget, leave us 5 stars or a friendly review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on, because that truly does help us to continue spreading our authentic AI message. All right, let's go ahead and dive right in. Hi, Jaime. Thank you so much for coming on Authentic AI for Entrepreneurs. I am so excited to bring you on the show, lady.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I cannot wait to quote unquote nerd out with you about AI and all the legal stuff when it comes to that, because this has been a conversation that we have been excited for as an audience, let me tell you. But before we dive into that, I always like to ask you, who are you? What do you do? And who do you serve?
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Jaime Bell. I'm a business lawyer and an entrepreneur. So primarily I serve freelancers, service providers, coaches in 2 different capacities. So first, I'm a business lawyer. I have a law firm called Wild Coast Law, where I serve entrepreneurs. And then I've also created the contracts market, which provides legal contract templates for Canadian and US-based entrepreneurs.
Yes, which we all need. So today we are going to be focusing about AI technology and maybe some things that we should be aware of when it comes to AI and the legal side of it and stuff. So how did you start first hearing about AI and dipping your toes into that world?
Well, I've been following this for a little while just because most of my community is really interested in how they can use AI to help take some of the load off or maybe remove a few of the hats that we seem to be wearing as entrepreneurs, myself included. I know when I started both of my businesses, I didn't really expect to have to be a content creator, a marketer, an accountant half the time, at a lawyer. So there's lots of different avenues that I think AI can help relieve that. So most of what I see is, or I've been following, is how entrepreneurs in the content creation space can use AI to take the load off. And so I've been using it as well as a starting point, which I'll dive into, but I find it really helpful for generating ideas for blogs or content, get the juices flowing when I'm trying to do an Instagram post or something like that. So I've been using it tentatively, mostly because, as I'm finding, it's not a cure for good content. And it also takes some training by the user to use it well. So I'm slowly dipping my toes in. I'm open to it for sure. And that's primarily how I've been using it.
Oh, yeah, lady. And you're speaking my language. That's how I've definitely been using it. And it's hilarious, too. I was totally one of those people who, when I first started hearing about it, like my first thought was, oh, no, is this going to turn us all into like mindless sheep? Is this going to hinder our creativity? Is it going to make the internet faker than it already is? And partially could happen still. But I also think that it's amazing for exactly what you said, like the idea generation and breaking through, blasting through those like writer's blocks or creative blocks that come up for you, and just working with it in a collaborative process. But for sure, I have definitely found that too. That's the focus of our first course that I've released is honing your brand persona to use with ChatGPT so that it can get a better feeling for your brand and make it sound more authentic to you. Because if you're just asking it general fluff stuff, like that's what you get back. And that's when the red flags really pop up for me. But what have you been seeing when it comes to this?
Yeah, really similar experiences. I think because I've tailored my prompt quite a bit now. I'm learning that I have to. Otherwise, I get this long legalese explanation, which is not even right a lot of the time. If I insert into the prompt, make it fun, make it relatable, there's 400 emojis, which just seems to be the default. And so that's not me either. So yeah, I'm just tailoring it. I think something really interesting that I've been seeing, and maybe just because as a culture, our attention span is so short, but I think it was around May of this year when ChatGPT launched. Don't quote me on exactly when, but there was this bomb that exploded on socials. We're all going to be replaced. We were in camp 1 or camp 2 as to how you were receiving this new tool, because that's what it is. It's a tool. It's not a replacement. I don't think yet for the human experience, the human injection into whatever the output is. So I'm noticing that in my community, that's tapering off a little bit, and we're integrating it more thoughtfully, perhaps, and using it as the tool in our businesses.
I think it's best when exactly what you said, it's a tool. That's like half of what this podcast is trying to do is be like, no, it's not going to take over your business. It shouldn't even run the show of your business, but it can be really helpful for amplifying your own expertise and organizing your own ideas and helping you jumpstart your own creative juices. I guess when it comes to AI and maybe especially using it in the content creation stuff, I know that there's a lot of worry about the legal copyright plagiarism. I know it's always changing all the time, but what are some of your initial thoughts when it comes to this stuff?
Yeah. So what I've been focusing on in thinking, especially about my community, which are, like I said, service providers, people who are creating content, putting it out into the world. Most of the worries about that is around copyright. So I think first, I'm going to give my disclaimer. There's 2 disclaimers. The first is, yes, I'm a lawyer, but this is all just information and advice for right now. So if something in this puts a red flag up for you along the way, it is really an issue spotting conversation. So that's when I really recommend you speak to someone more local to you so you can get some good advice. And also, this is a conversation that's happening in November of 2023. So if you're listening to this anytime in 2024 or even sooner than that, maybe look for some more recent information, because the rate of how everything's changing right now is just so fast paced. We're not really sure where these things are going to land. Anyway, back to your question about copyright. So I think just so we're all on the same page when we're thinking about this, when you create something unique and you put pen to paper, for lack of a better explanation, you inherently are granted a bundle of rights called copyright. So you don't actually have to do anything in order to get legal protection for that unique work. So if you write a poem, for instance, pen to paper, texting to screen, you automatically are granted rights to that work that you can enforce against other people if they start to use it without your permission. Now, the thing about copyright is that in order to be granted these rights, that work actually has to be original. It can't just be a concept or an idea. And you also have to have a certain level of human skill or creative judgment in molding that work. So this is where it's really interesting from a copyright perspective when we're using AI to create content, because if copyright is only given to those works that are unique and created as a result of someone's creative skill and judgment, does an AI output possess the requirement needed to be granted copyright protection? So that's something that you should be thinking about when you're creating works through AI. The first level of analysis for you should be like, is it important to me that whatever I post, if someone steals it, I have rights to enforce against that person who maybe uses it without my permission? If you're using AI to create a social media post and you write for me. And for instance, I talk a lot about obviously contracts on the Contracts Market Instagram page. The prompt might be write an easy to read post about why you should use contracts in your business. And I get that generic output probably with 5 emojis. And that was not really the result of creative, unique skill and judgment. That is a prompt that somebody could have created who has absolutely no skill or understanding about why you need to actually use contracts in your business. It was really a terrible prompt in terms of being unique. Now, that probably means that the output is not I don't really have copyrights granted in that output because there was nothing unique. There was no judgment or skill to craft that output. Now, where it becomes really interesting is if you start really fine-tuning your prompting process. So say I came up with this incredible prompt, which I am not there yet in my use of AI. Haven't had that much time to spend on it yet. And then I got the prompt. And then in the next question I put into ChatGPT, for instance, I started honing in on the prompt. You did this okay, but let's add in some of this kind of flair or that kind of jazz to my prompt. And I start really fine tuning it. And then I'm starting to input some of my own unique thoughts about how I want to fine tune that output. Now we're in a realm that perhaps we can have some copyright protections on that output. So that doesn't mean that you can't just use a boring input to create a really neutral kind of output. If you're not worried about enforcing on people who might steal that post, if it's a time-saving tool, if it's not really worth it to you to go after it, then by all means, just cut and paste right out of ChatGPT, post it on Instagram, and run with it. But if you're using it for a purpose in your business that you're getting quite significant commercial gain out of, perhaps you're using it, as we've seen, in creating courses and you're selling it. You would be financially impacted if someone took that course and started selling it on their own. Then that's a situation where I really think, and the law is trending, that you really need to either fine tune that prompt such that you could prove, if it came to it with lawyers involved, that you actually really fine-tuned that prompt to create a really unique and creative output. I really also don't think that's enough. So if that's something that you are using AI to create, like a course, a unique course, I think that AI is simply a tool to have as a starting place. And I would advise my clients and turn it to your listeners to think about taking what it creates and then using that as a starting point. So you're starting to fine tune that process. And I really think that's what most people, your listeners, are probably doing, because we're not there yet in terms of having AI mimic our voice and mimic the human experience that we're trying to convey through our content. So it's really coming back to just being a starting point, I think.
Oh man, so many good things in that. I loved your disclaimer. And it's just all stuff that is always going to be evolving. And what I just keep encouraging people too is to continue getting curious and learning and try to hone and form your own opinions about this stuff. What aligns with you and what are you comfortable with and stuff. And part of that is just like learning and thinking critically about, what does this mean? Whenever I hear people being concerned about the copyright stuff, is the stuff that ChatGPT creating copyright infringement or like plagiarism? Like that's like a lot of the thought process that I've been hearing.
That's a really technical piece. And they're obviously the artists and the musicians and the authors are saying they are taking their thought process and argument. And I'm not an expert in the mining of information by any means, but I think that group's argument is that they're taking snippets from their works and mishmashing them together, cut and paste, slopping it together into a bucket, and then creating an output that is a jumble of copyrighted work. Now, the other side of that is the powers that be behind the technology saying, actually, they're mining pieces of information from the content that actually isn't copyright infringement. It's smaller micro pieces of information that's coming together in a more of a predictive technology. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but you can see why the two sides aren't agreeing on this. And so I think that is actually a good point that you bring up. in the more technical aspects, when we're talking about coding, like you're creating this really unique piece of code, that if that got leaked or used in another way because you've put it into the AI learning system, maybe you want to keep that confidential information out of your prompts, because a lot of the terms and conditions of these software tools are saying that whatever you're putting into the prompts becomes part of the learning. So I believe, and don't quote me on this, there's currently a Samsung lawsuit going on about some leaked code or something like that, because the AI learned from that code and gave a prompt that was copying it. I don't know. It's like, just these are the kind of hot topics that are coming up right now. And as everybody is well aware, the legal system is slow to react. It takes a lot to move law to meet technology. And right now, the human brain is not keeping up, let alone all the people trying to create these laws to keep up, and also create laws that are going to stand the test of time when we're really not sure where this is all going to lead. I know the governments, especially in the US right now, are trying to regulate a lot of AI tools and restrict them for political ads and things like that. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. And for your US listeners, right now, we do know that if you're trying to get copyright registration for a unique work, so say, for instance, you create a course that you used AI and you want to register that work with the Copyright Office, they're asking you to disclose the use of AI. Canada, we're trending that way too. We always tend to follow what you're doing down there. And so it's just going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. Right now, we know copyright registration requires a human element of input. Will that stay? Will that stand forever? We're not sure yet. TBD.
I find it to be so exciting that we're learning and figuring this out as we're going. And yeah, it's scary too, but it's so interesting to hear about all these different things popping up. And we're figuring it out right now, guys. So exactly what you said, it's like tread lightly. But I think that an important thing that I'm hearing too from what you're saying is to also be aware of, like, when you're using this technology, ChatGPT or whatever, for whatever, be aware of what you use it for, maybe, and maybe make those decisions, like, based on that. You probably aren't going to go after someone for copying an Instagram post, but exactly what you said, it's if it's something bigger, a course, is that a concern for you, I guess, right?
Yeah, you want to hedge your bets that if your work was put into a court of law, which, to be honest, most of my community is not going to take it that far unless they're having significant financial damages because someone is using their work. I've had cases come through my law firm where people have found their full course uploaded into the dark web somewhere, or Instagram posts repurposed, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, the reality is to take these cases quite far. The burden of proof is quite high to show that it's your work and that it's almost duplicated content. And now this aspect of, hey, how much is actually yours versus AI? It's always a risk, cost, benefits, risk analysis, even to get to the point where you're going to enforce it. So I think it's really just hedging your bets to make sure that your content you're putting out there that you would hope you might win an infringement case on is sufficiently yours.
And I like that you're honest about that as well, because to what extent does this matter anyway? Am I going to take someone to court over my $27 course and all that different stuff?
It's interesting though, because I actually had this come up with a client, and I don't do intellectual property enforcement, like copyright enforcement. And if that $27 course has been sold 300,000 times, it's probably pretty likely you're going to spend some money to enforce it. And this was a situation one of my clients came up against in her business, and make sure that you've got a good leg to stand on. So for that situation, she had registered that course with the Copyright Office. So when you do that, so this kind of is circling back to the beginning of this conversation. Yes, you get inherent bundle of rights that you can enforce if push comes to shove. But if you take it to the next level where you register that work with the Copyright Office, which actually isn't that hard to do and it's not that expensive, that's evidence that you are the owner in the first instance. So you don't actually have to prove you're the owner of anything. It's just you've got that copyright registration, you're the owner, and you're not wasting your time going through all the evidence that you actually are the owner. Now, again, it comes back to what pieces of content are you going to register for copyright? Every blog post, every Instagram post? Probably not. But that course that you're willing to sell, that might be a good idea, or a manual or a book or something along those lines. So, yeah. So there's different levels of time or proof that you have. And so it just depends where you want to land and what are the odds of someone stealing it. And then your financial consequences if they do.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting to think about too. And honestly, too, I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to just copyright in general. So I'm glad we're talking about this and I can play the Dumbo, asking the dumb questions. But
that's the thing. We should be looking to people in their industry. So don't judge yourself for those kind of things because you didn't sign up to be a copyright lawyer. In your business, so I think
that's what you're for.
This is the thing I find with entrepreneurs is we are so judgmental of ourselves for not knowing these things. It's like I don't know anything about bookkeeping in my business. I beat myself up all the time that my bookkeeping is sometimes a bit of a cluster, but I didn't sign up to be a bookkeeper. So I think this is where a podcast, this is issue spotting only. So now you could go to an expert or you have a little bit more information in your toolbox. So don't beat yourself up over that. That's actually a big core value of mine in my business is trying to realize that we cannot be all the things.
Yes. Thank you for that, lady. I love that. And that's one of those things I found with my business too. And just entrepreneurship in general. You're so right. We beat ourselves up so much, but I'm very happy to be asking all the silly questions to you right now while we have you. And so this is wonderful. And so I think it's really interesting too. Oh man, so many places I want to take this, but because we are on the brink of figuring out the copyright stuff with AI, it's a really good idea that you guys are already listening to this podcast episode. Good job, guys. But then also start trying to integrate some of these practices into our stuff that we're doing right now. And also maybe go ahead and take the step and apply for the copyrights for the things that really do matter for you right now so that you're on the cusp of as this is all unfolding. Is that making sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, and picking where you want to spend your time and money. Copyright for certain things in your business, the registration is a great tool in your toolbox for sure. Again, you're not going to copyright everything. I am a believer right now that if you're not starting to use AI in your business, you're going to get left behind. And that might sit okay with some people. Some people just don't want to use AI. They want to keep it totally authentic. They want to do all the things. And I think that's totally fine. I have no judgment about that. But for people who are curious about it, I would say listening to podcasts like this is great and just playing around with it. It's really low risk. What I would recommend, and this is such a boring piece of advice, but when you're choosing the tools that you're using, just take a quick look at the terms of use for each of these different platforms. Just make sure that you're actually able to use these outputs for commercial purposes. It's so hard to police that I just right now don't see it being an issue, but we might not be that far ahead that an output has something attached to it where it can track. Is that reasonable for the listeners here to worry about? Probably not, but it's just something to get in the habit of. When you click that I accept box on terms of use, that is a written agreement and consent that you're willing to abide by those terms. So just get in the habit, at least for the major pieces of software that you're using on a day-to-day basis for commercial purposes in your business. Just take a quick look at those terms of use. I know it's boring, but it's just a good habit to get into. And then the second piece of that is making sure that you and in your own business have website terms of use that have specific clauses talking about how people can and can't use the content on your website. Because no matter what piece of content, how you created it, how you generated it, if you have found that someone's using it without your permission for commercial purposes, you want to have something to come back to that says, yeah, I've got this bundle of esoteric copyrights that you might not have known about. But when you agreed to use my website, you clicked on my terms of use, I accept button. And in there, it says that you can use the content on my website for the purposes that it's there for, but you can't repurpose it or share it. All these things like freebies and courses, and the digital product world is obviously fraught with these kind of licensing violations. So just making sure that your own website terms of use are really clear about how people can and can't interact with your website and use the content that is there.
Oh, yeah, totally. And you were mentioning disclosing that you are using AI for certain things. I know whenever I was watching your webinar video that you were saying like it's a good idea if you are using this maybe in courses or for different things to have a little disclosure saying this was made with the help of AI or something. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think getting in the habit of disclosing that we're using AI for certain things in our business is just a nice way to give comfort to people. Right now, it's not legally required. Again, November 2023, who knows what's coming? We are seeing the Copyright Office required disclosure. But I think it's a good habit to get into because I don't think we're that far off from AI, me being able to use generative AI to have me present a course, but it's not really me, and to mimic my voice and my likeness. And in those situations, I think we're going to be required to disclose. So it's not legally required. It's a good habit. I think because there's so many people on the fence about whether there's value anymore in getting content from people who are using AI heavily in their business, I think it's just a nice reminder that maybe you've used AI, but the thoughts, the process, your intelligence is still what is informing the end piece of content. So it's a trust thing. It's a transparency thing. And I think it's just, there's a whole ethical and moral debate about it as well, which I think is outside the scope of this. But I think we're just trending towards transparency if we disclose.
Yeah. And I do think that people listening to this podcast for the most part are wanting to figure out how can I use AI in an authentic way that still feels good and stuff. So I'm glad that we're bringing that up. And I don't think you have to be ashamed of it. I think like, why not disclose it? Because it's becoming the new normal. You might be getting left behind if you're not getting curious about it at the very least. How might you go about disclosing that you're using AI for certain things? Is it just sharing about it with your audience in general, or adding a little disclaimer to different pieces of material that you had AI's assistance with, or what does that look like?
Yeah, just a disclaimer that lives in your disclaimer section, which is a whole different podcast episode about how you've used AI, but it's still your own. And just because you've used AI doesn't mean that you don't own copyright in your work. It's snuggled into the licensing.
Nestled in there somewhere. And I'm sure we could get JB's help and check out your contract shop for help with this stuff. But I do think that's so interesting. And this is bringing it back to the beginning of our conversation again. I didn't really realize yet that there's like different things happening. And I know this is all changing, but like that you might be able to copyright and prove copyright on work by showing that you finessed your work enough with like ChatGPT or a different AI software to make it still original, right? Because that really is where I have found the magic to be when it comes to using ChatGPT. That's what I encourage people to do is go deeper, get specific with your prompts and stuff. And every time I use ChatGPT, I go back and forth with it so much. And I take bits and pieces. It'll write an email for me. I'll be revising it. And then I'll get to a point where I'm like, ooh, I like the idea of this sentence, but it needs to be something else. Like it's not quite right. But yeah, I'll go in, I'll be like, can you please brainstorm 5 different ways to say this or expand on this idea? And that's how I get there and stuff. But that makes me, I know that it might change. I know it might not be the same, but that gives me like a little bit more of a security feeling when it comes to using AI. Because exactly, it doesn't feel like I'm just copy pasting AI.
No, we're not there yet. Maybe we'll look back on this episode in 2 years and laugh. But I'm the same. Like when I put a prompt in, I'm rewriting 98% of it. Maybe the idea and the concept is there. That's why I think. And then there's this whole legal argument as to in order to show, like for even the AI copyright argument to come up, you have to actually admit in your copyright application that you used it. And I'm not advising anyone to do anything illegal. But who's checking? And I'm sure that will all develop as well, the tracking and everything like that. But really, would I disclose in my copyright application if I rewrote an output that was 98% rewritten? Guess I'll have to see.
That's for you to decide, guys.
Yeah, you should go.
Oh, yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. AI is so much just of a collaboration. So often to me, it feels like having just like a team member who I'm like bouncing ideas around with. So a lot of it does feel original still. So,
and what we're seeing in the court cases coming through is that people are very specifically saying AI generated this aspect of the work because they're trying to push the case law forward. So the average person submitting copyright registration is not really looking for that kind of. A lot of these cases are just because they're so new.
And you know what else is funny? Because of the generative nature of ChatGPT and other similar software, like I don't think it's really possible to get a word for word exact same response over. Anytime I've been using ChatGPT, I will ask it the same question and it will give me similar ideas often and stuff, but every response itself is different, like using different wording or different. Like,
that would be the argument for the data piece mining versus the copy snippet, you know?
Yeah, very interesting. Oh, okay. I have a somewhat selfish question because I am working on our Authentic AI online course library to help people do specific things with the help of AI. And I am sharing some prompts within my courses to help them brainstorm their own ideas for different things and get specific with that. Do you have any thoughts about for someone who is sharing like my own specific prompts within my own courses and stuff? Are there any legal things that I should be worried about or concerned about that come up for you?
Again, it comes right back to the first conversation, which is how unique and skilled is the prompt that you've created for your course. I'm going to assume quite, because you're working on it. And so, it just comes down to if it is unique and you've used your creative skill and judgment to create that, then there's copyrights granted to you in it. Next step, you could register the course content for copyright registration. And then the icing on the cake to tie it all together is have online course terms of use, which really set out specific licensing requirements, because you want to let anybody who's purchasing your course know that you can reuse the prompts in your business. You can use them however, but those rights are limited to not sharing with a friend or even maybe the whole team at your workplace, and definitely not reselling the bundle, the course. So because it's AI, it's not really any different than the advice I would give you if it was just an online course and it had nothing to do with the prompts.
Yes. Ooh, and I love this. This is such a good way to think about it. Through all of my freaking research and just like using AI, I've found some specific phrases that I love using because I think it gets to the core of what I'm asking for when it comes to ChatGPT throwing me back responses that like is exactly what I want and makes sense. And so those are like especially specific things that I really feel like are unique and represent definitely my own original work in that way. Does that make sense?
Totally. So maybe if you had an infringement case, you'd die on that hill versus another one.
Oh man, I have loved this so much. Thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything else that's popping up for you that you want to share with my people right now?
Yeah, I think just to summarize, it's a tool to be used and the output should be finessed. Don't be scared of it. Get really curious. See how it can be a tool for you that benefits your business. And just like anything, don't get stressed about it. Go with the flow and just see where it leads you.
I love your outlook, Jamie. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Can you please share once again how everyone can connect with you and learn more about you? Because I know they'll want to do that for sure.
Yeah. So I'm primarily on Instagram at Contracts Market, and my website is thecontractsmarket.com. And I've got a pretty good email community going. So if you're looking for contracts or information or just issue spotting the legal side of your business, it's a great spot to be hanging out.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again. And I hope we can chat again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. Such a great conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it too. And if you did, don't forget to connect with me on Instagram. I am at Feel Good Social or at Authentic AI for entrepreneurs. I would love to connect with you over there and just keep this conversation going. All right. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and I will catch you next time I catch you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Authentic AI for Entrepreneurs, my friend. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your shows.